Trucks hauling heavy equipment are rolling into the Everglades to set up a new immigration detention camp that's been nicknamed Alligator Alcatraz. It's one of 2 state-run centers being created to help federal authorities detain undocumented immigrants. Take a look. That equipment will help build a temporary detention site at an abandoned airstrip in Miami-Dade County that's 39 square miles. Within the next month or 2, authorities plan to send up to 1,000 immigrants facing deportation. It's not clear how authorities would handle a severe storm threat during hurricane season or the blistering heat.
We have environmental and fiscal stewardship and safety concerns about this information.
A letter to the mayor from Florida's emergency management director says, quote, according to Governor DeSantis' emergency powers, the division intends to utilize the airport to assist the federal government with immigration enforcement, end quote. Betty Osceola is an advocate for the Miccosukee tribe, whose land lies nearby.
This threat, again, opens the door to some type of a development. They say it's temporary, but who knows what other harebrained idea they're going to get that maybe it should be permanent.
The Department of Homeland Security says the new facility will cost about $450 million a year to operate and will be reimbursed in large part by a FEMA program previously used to shelter migrants in places like hotels in New York City. Governor Ron DeSantis is also directing Florida officials to work on a second state-run immigration center. It's at Camp Blanding. That's the Florida National Guard base that's located an hour southwest of Jacksonville. Plenty of discussions. Alligator what?
Yeah, Alligator
Travis,
Alcatraz.
I
was at the governor's press conference. I think it was yesterday. And he signed a great mental health bill that, again, bipartisan support on that. But Alligator Alcatraz, he talked on some other issues, and this was, of course, one of them. And I had a chuckle to a friend. I said, we're going to see that on T-shirts in no time flat. Maybe we should come up with some designs and sell some. But
how do you feel about that, though?
Hey, if you want plush accommodations, you probably ought to enter illegally through New York City or California. I am not opposed to it. In fact, this is not an abandoned base. This is a base that is oftentimes used, especially during hurricane preparedness, when they're marshaling linemen and folks to address our electric problems,
This is a base
aftermath
that was part of a plan in 1968 to have a huge airport that would service Sonic aircraft, and so the plan was abandoned. But
well, look, and I was looking at the numbers. I think Tampa Bay Times reported it was a $245 or $254 per person cost, and I'm thinking, man, I could pull out my hotel discount apps and probably find a hotel room for half that price or less. But at least the feds are putting up the money on that, and so the feds are communicating with DeSantis and
on the other side of
this.
the coin are folks who say this is inhumane to have those conditions. Jonathan, what are you hearing from young Democrats?
I'm hearing that everyone is worried about these ICE officers going around not identifying themselves, and it's, I think, clear with facilities like this that the administration is trying very hard to make some of these mistakes disappear. This is a facility that is solving a problem that doesn't exist of all of the migrants that ICE already has in detention, well, that they claim are all migrants. The government's own data shows that over half of them have no criminal record whatsoever. And being present in the United States without status is not a crime. So we're building this big facility, spending all of this money to house people who are literally doing nothing wrong. I think this is part of an effort to look flashy for Donald Trump and his allies to say, look, we're delivering on this campaign promise. Let's ignore the campaign promise that we won't get involved in any war, because that clearly didn't pan out over the last couple of days. I think it is a lot of money and is a lot of human suffering to look good on TV.
In fairness to folks who would oppose that statement of being in the U.S. without a legal status is not, without an official status is not a crime, and the immigration officials would tell you it in fact is a crime.
But many of the people I think that he's referring to are people that are actually in the immigration process and are going to be put into that detention. So they're actually following the laws of this country. But let's put it out there. Number one, we're very happy to take FEMA money federal money for certain things, but we don't want to take federal money when we want to have a high rail from Tampa to Orlando. That's inconsistent. But the calculus doesn't make sense on this. A few years ago, we passed some of the strictest immigration laws in the country, and accounting was about $12.6 billion that cost the Florida economy. Then you add another 450 a year million. Okay, so economically, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Targeting workers that President Trump himself said are essential to our economy. So this is more about, I think, political theater that costs environmental, costs humanitarian costs, costs economic costs, not to mention that people are still recovering from the hurricane. I live in St. Pete. People still don't have their drywall up. And yet we're going to use a very vulnerable piece of our ecosystem, the Everglades, to put a high dense, possibly temporary detention center, and we're going to forego the rest of the 20 million in Florida that might need supplies to be flown out of there. That's suspect to me.
Eric?
So one of the things that occurs to me, there's been recent reporting about the difficulty of keeping prisons in America at safe temperature levels. There are a tremendous number of inmates who are incarcerated in places that don't have air conditioning, or are incarcerated in places where they might as well not have it because it doesn't work well. And given Florida's temperatures, the first thing I thought of is these are people who aren't necessarily dangerous criminals, and they might be housed in a facility. Are they really going to spend the money that it's going to take to make sure that they're at least in livable conditions? I have a feeling this number that you cited is nowhere near what they're going to have to spend. And if people think that once they spend all that money to create this facility that it's going to be temporary, I think they're fooling themselves. So if you're going to create a permanent facility that may house people whose biggest crime is that they didn't get their paperwork filed in time, you better make sure at least that you're taking care of them in a way that is humane. And I'm not even convinced of that.
And by the way,
I'm confident that they're not all going to be just people who didn't get their paperwork filed in time.
That could be true, but
there are many violent illegals, and they're taking up space in our county. The sheriffs are saying they're taking up space and manpower and resources from our 67 county sheriffs.
I think
and
the
their jail
percentages
systems.
are pretty akin to the percentages of the number of people in America that are actual violent offenders. So there's a lot of parallels, but let me just say this. The Supreme Court has said in the past that not having proper ventilation, not having proper temperature is a violation of the 8th Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. Are we inviting more litigation with this kind of placement? But more importantly, what are we saying about putting a facility in the Everglades because we want the imagery for our friends and neighbors to be afraid that if they got out, they'd be eaten by alligators? I mean, where are we in terms of wanting to pursue what used to be a Bush-era compassionate conservatism? I guess that's way out the window.
I grew up in Florida. I was always. We're still concerned about getting eaten by alligators if you step off.
Well, I got to say,
freshwater.
this whole term Alligator Alcatraz seems a way of trivializing something that's especially serious, because not only do we have the questions about the facility, but we have the questions about whether or not the government is doing a good enough job of vetting the people that it's going after. And I would much rather see resources devoted to making sure that the people that ICE are interrogating and that they're deporting actually deserve this level of attention. I mean, we've had one individual who the government admits it deported by mistake. It has taken months to get him returned to this country, and I don't even want to imagine how much the legal fees have been involved in correcting a mistake that the government admitted it made. So let's spend some money on making sure that the people that are being targeted by ICE are the people who deserve to be targeted and the people who need to be deported, rather than building a facility to warehouse some of these mistakes.